Judge evicts 90-year-old widow, donor pays mortgage and buys the courthouse. The crack of the gavel was like a bone snapping. It was a sound that echoed not in the ears, but in the hollow of the chest. For Agnes Reed, 90 years old and shrinking, in the cavernous witness chair, it felt like the final splintering of a life she had so carefully, so quietly, built. "Order," Judge Terence Albright commanded, his voice as sharp and sterile as the January air outside. He didn't need to raise it. The silence in courtroom for B was absolute. A heavy blanket woven from fear, pity, and the stale smell of old paper and cheap disinfectant. The court has reviewed the petition of Sterling National Bank versus the defendant, Ms. Agnes Reed. Agnes's hands, gnarled with the beautiful, painful arthritis of 9 decades, tightened on the worn fabric of her winter coat. It was a good coat, navy blue wool, purchased with her late husband, Thomas, for their 50th wedding anniversary. It was the last new coat she'd ever bought. Her knuckles were white, pushing against the soft wool, the only solid thing in a world that was tilting on its axis. The courtroom was a study in intimidating mahogany and indifferent light. Sunlight, thin and watery, struggled through the tall, arched windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, frantic ghosts. The wood of the judge's bench was polished to a merciless sheen, reflecting the fluorescent lights above, in long, unforgiving streaks. It was the kind of room designed to make a person feel small, insignificant. Today, it was succeeding. Judge Albright was a man carved from the same hard, polished material as his bench. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his black robes immaculate, a stark contrast to Agnes's slightly frayed cuffs. He looked at her not as a person, but as a docket number, a final piece of unpleasant administrative debris, to be cleared from his desk before lunch. "The facts are not in dispute," he continued, his gaze sweeping over a sheaf of papers he held as if they were contaminated. "The property at 417 Sycamore Lane is subject to a reverse mortgage held by the plaintiff. The terms of this agreement stipulate that the homeowner must remain current on property taxes and homeowner's insurance." "The defendant," he said, finally deigning to look at her, his eyes cold and gray as a winter sky, "has failed to meet these obligations. A tax lien has been placed on the property by the county." On the other side of the room, the bank's lawyer, a young man with a face too smooth and a suit too sharp, allowed a small, triumphant smirk to flicker across his lips before schooling it into an expression of professional solemnity. His name was Mr. Graves, a fact Agnes found morbidly appropriate. He had the hungry, patient look of an undertaker. Agnes's own legal aid lawyer, a well-meaning but overwhelmed young woman named Sarah, stood up, her voice trembling slightly. "Your Honor, we are not disputing the arrears. We are asking for consideration. My client, Ms. Reed, suffered a fall in August. She was hospitalized for 3 weeks with a broken hip. The tax bill, the insurance notice, they were simply missed. An oversight during a time of extreme physical and emotional distress. She has lived in that house for 70 years. Her husband, Thomas, a veteran of the Korean War, built it with his own 2 hands." Sarah gestured toward Agnes, a fragile doll lost in the imposing architecture of the court. "She has the full amount of the arrears, $4,212 right here, a cashier's check. We can make the plaintiff whole today. Right now, we are simply asking for the court to grant a stay on the foreclosure proceedings and allow her to rectify the error." For a moment, a fragile bubble of hope floated in the tense air. The spectators, a sad collection of people facing their own financial reckonings, leaned forward. A simple mistake. A check in hand. It seemed reasonable. It seemed human. Judge Albright let the silence stretch, a tool he used with surgical precision. He steepled his fingers, his manicured nails gleaming. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of patronizing disappointment. "The law is not a feeling. It is not a suggestion. It is a contract, a series of obligations. When those obligations are not met, there are consequences. Compassion is a virtue for the church, for the soup kitchen. In this courtroom, I deal in facts and statutes." He picked up the gavel again, holding it aloft like a scepter. The time for rectifying the error was before it defaulted. Sterling National Bank is legally within its rights to foreclose. To grant a stay would be to reward negligence. It would set a precedent that I am unwilling to establish. What would happen if every person who missed a bill came to this court asking for a do-over? The entire system of credit and finance would collapse. He was speaking not to Agnes, but to the room, to the very idea of order itself. He was making an example of her. This 90-year-old widow, this woman who had outlived her husband, her friends, her own strength, was now a symbol of societal decay. She was chaos, and he was the wall holding it back. Therefore, he declared, his voice ringing with the cold finality of a prison door slamming shut, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The foreclosure will proceed as scheduled. The defendant has 30 days to vacate the premises. He brought the gavel down. Crack. The sound went through Agnes like a bullet. The bubble of hope didn't just pop. It shattered into a million icy shards. She felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. 70 years. 70 years of waking up to the morning sun, filtering through the leaves of the great oak tree Thomas had planted as a sapling. 70 years of measuring her children's height on the kitchen door frame. 70 years of Christmases, of birthdays, of quiet Tuesday evenings. All of it, erased by that one, sharp sound. Sarah's hand was on her arm, a gentle, useless pressure. Agnes. Agnes. Are you okay? But Agnes couldn't speak. She could only stare at the judge, this man in black who held the power to unmake her world. He was already shuffling his papers, moving on. She was dismissed. Her life was dismissed. Around her, the courtroom began to exhale, the spectators murmuring, their faces a mixture of horror and a grim, secret relief that it wasn't them. Not today. As Sarah helped her stand, her legs feeling like brittle twigs, Agnes's gaze drifted past the smirking Mr. Graves, past the pitying faces, and landed on a young woman sitting in the back row. She was barely out of her teens, with bright, angry eyes and a cheap smartphone held up, its small red light glowing like a malevolent star. She had been recording the entire, brutal, humiliating spectacle. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. Agnes saw in the girl's face, not pity, but a furious, burning indignation. Then the moment passed. Sarah guided her out of the courtroom, each step in agony, leaving behind the polished wood, the indifferent light, and the ghost of her husband's legacy, now condemned to be sold to the highest bidder. The walk down the long marbled hallway felt like the last walk of her life. The cold January air hit her as they exited the courthouse, but she barely felt it. The cold was inside her now, a permanent frost settling deep in her soul. The house on Sycamore Lane didn't feel like hers anymore. For the first time in 70 years, Agnes felt like a trespasser in her own home. The 30-day eviction notice, a stark white paper with aggressive black lettering, lay on the whole table like a death certificate. Every object she looked at screamed a silent, painful goodbye. She ran her hand along the floral wallpaper in the dining room, its pattern faded and soft from decades of sunlight. Thomas had put it up himself in the spring of '68. He'd gotten paste in his hair, and she'd laughed until she cried. The memory was so vivid, so tangible, she could almost smell the sweet, starchy scent of the adhesive. Now, it was just paper on a wall, waiting to be torn down. She walked into the living room, her feet shuffling on the worn Persian rug. Above the mantelpiece hung a framed photograph of Thomas, young and handsome in his army uniform. His smile, easy and confident. "We'll be all right, Aggie," he seemed to say, his eyes full of the boundless optimism of a man who had survived a war and believed he could conquer anything. "No, Tommy," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "We're not all right. I'm not all right. I failed you." A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped and traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. She sank into her favorite armchair, the one with a permanent imprint of her body. The fabric softened and thinned by countless hours of reading, knitting, and simply being. The springs groaned a familiar, comforting sound, but today it sounded like a lament. This was it. The bottom, the absolute, crushing nadir of her existence. She had been a good wife, a good mother, a good neighbor. She had paid her taxes, obeyed the laws, baked cookies for the new family next door. She had lived a quiet, unassuming life, asking for nothing. And this was her reward: to be cast out, to die in a sterile, state-run facility, with linoleum floors and the smell of bleach. Her memories bulldozed and paved over. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had been the heartbeat of her home for as long as she could remember. Each tick was a second slipping away. 30 days. 29, 28. She closed her eyes, a wave of despair so profound it was almost peaceful washing over her. Maybe it was better this way. Just let go. Surrender. What was there to fight for? She was a 90-year-old woman with a broken hip and a broken heart. The world had moved on, and it had no more use for her. She sat there for hours, lost in a gray fog of memory and regret. The sun arced across the sky, its pale light shifting through the room, tracing the slow passage of her last days. Dusk began to settle, painting the room in shades of purple and gray dot, and then something shifted. It wasn't a bolt of lightning or a sudden epiphany. It was a quieter, deeper thing. A flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It started in her gut, a slow, warming coal of defiance. It wasn't anger at the judge, or the bank, or the unfairness of it all. It was something more fundamental. It was dignity. They could take her house. They could sell her memories. They could auction off the very floorboards Thomas had nailed into place. But they could not take who she was. She was Agnes Reed, wife of Thomas Reed, mother of 2, grandmother of 5. She had survived the Great Depression, a world war, the loss of her husband, the slow, relentless erosion of time. She would not be erased. She would not become a weeping, pathetic creature in the sterile purgatory of a nursing home. She pushed herself up from the chair, her joints screaming in protest, but her spine felt a little straighter. Her gaze fell upon the eviction notice. 30 days. Fine. She would not spend those 30 days weeping. She would spend them preparing. She would pack her own things. She would choose which memories to take with her. She would walk out of this house on her own 2 feet, with her head held high. She would not give Judge Albright or Mr. Graves the satisfaction of seeing her broken. They had taken her home. But she would not let them take her soul. She walked to the hall closet and pulled out a stack of sturdy cardboard boxes she'd saved from a long-ago move of her son's. The smell of dry paper and time filled the air. She picked up the first box, the tape screeching as she assembled it, a sound of grim purpose in the quiet house. She would start with the books. Thomas's beloved collection of history tomes. Each one held a memory. Each one was a piece of him, and each one would be packed with care, with love, with the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who had lost everything but herself. The video was shaky, the audio tinny and distorted. It wasn't professionally shot. It wasn't slick. And that was its power. It began with the face of Sarah, the young legal aid lawyer, her voice earnest and pleading. Then it panned to Agnes, a study in quiet desperation, her small frame swallowed by the witness chair. The camera zoomed in, a little clumsily, on her gnarled hands clutching her coat. Then it settled on Judge Albright. The raw, unedited footage captured every nuance of his performance. The condescending tilt of his head, the dismissive wave of his hand, the cold, self-satisfied gleam in his eyes as he delivered his speech about contracts and consequences. "Compassion is a virtue for the church," he said, his voice crystal clear in the hushed courtroom. "In this courtroom, I deal in facts and statutes." And then, the final, brutal blow. The gavel. Crack. The young woman who had filmed it was named Maya Washington. She was a journalism student at the local community college and ran a small, hyper-local blog called the Civic Watchdog. It usually got a few hundred views, mostly from her mom and a handful of politically active friends. She uploaded the 2-minute clip with a simple, stark title: 90-year-old war widow, evicted by Judge Albright over $4,212 tax bill she tried to pay in court. She added a single hashtag, #Justice for Agnes. She posted it at 1:15 p.m. By 3 p.m., her blog had crashed. The video, ripped and re-uploaded by others, began to spread like wildfire. First, it was local Facebook groups. "Does anyone know this judge? This is disgusting. That poor woman. She built that house." Then it hit Twitter. A local news anchor for a rival station to the one that usually got Courthouse scoops saw it and retweeted it with a single word: unconscionable. That was the spark on the gasoline. By dinner time, #Justice for Agnes was trending in their state. By 10 p.m., it was trending nationally. The video, grainy and raw, was everywhere. It was on TikTok, set to sad piano music, with teenagers reacting. In horror, it was on Reddit's Our Public Freakout, where the comments section was a torrent of fury. It was on YouTube, where it racked up 1 million views in less than 12 hours. The story was irresistible. It was a real-life fairy tale in reverse, a morality play for the digital age. The villain was perfect, a smug, heartless judge. The victim was perfect, a frail, dignified widow who had done nothing wrong. The injustice was clear, simple, and infuriating. By morning, it was on the national news. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they all played the clip. Pundits dissected Albright's every word. Legal experts were brought on to explain that while the judge was technically correct, his lack of judicial discretion was appalling and a stain on the bench. Celebrities started weighing in. A Hollywood action star with a reputation for playing tough guys with a heart of gold tweeted, "This is not justice. This is cruelty. Someone find Agnes Reed. I'll pay her mortgage." An iconic pop singer, famous for her advocacy for the elderly, posted a tearful Instagram story, pleading with her 200 million followers to call Judge Albright's office and politely demand he reconsider. The system began to tremble. Judge Albright's office phone line was so overwhelmed it ceased to function. His email inbox filled with tens of thousands of messages, ranging from reasoned arguments to death threats. The presiding judge of the district court issued a terse statement. "We are aware of the video concerning Judge Albright and are reviewing the matter internally." Sterling National Bank, the plaintiff, was hit with a digital tsunami. Their social media pages were flooded with angry comments. #boycott Sterling Bank started trending. People posted videos of themselves cutting up their Sterling credit cards. Branches were picketed. The smooth-faced lawyer, Mr. Graves, was identified, and his law firm's Yelp page was review-bombed into oblivion. The bank's CEO, a man who prided himself on his company's community-first image, went into crisis mode. The viral wave had become a tidal wave, and it was about to crash down on everyone involved. Agnes, meanwhile, was oblivious to the storm, raging in the world outside her quiet street. She had no computer, no smartphone. Her television was only for her evening game shows. She spent her day packing boxes, sorting through a lifetime of treasures. A quiet, focused grief, her only companion. It wasn't until the second day, when a news van from a national network pulled up in front of her house, that she realized something was happening. Then another van arrived, and another. Soon Sycamore Lane, her peaceful, sleepy street, looked like a media encampment. Reporters with microphones and cameras trampled the frozen grass of her lawn, all shouting her name. She stood at her window, bewildered, watching the chaos unfold. It was Sarah, her legal aid lawyer, who finally broke through the media cordon. Her face flushed with a kind of terrified excitement. "Agnes, you are not going to believe this," Sarah said, holding up her phone, the screen showing the viral video. You're famous." Agnes stared at the tiny image of herself in the courtroom, a small, hunched figure of misery. She saw the judge, his face twisted in a sneer of superiority, and she heard the collective roar of a world she didn't know. A world that had seen her humiliation and had risen up in a great crashing wave of fury on her behalf. The first domino to fall was the bank. On the third day of the media firestorm, Sterling National Bank issued a formal, groveling apology. The CEO himself, a man named Robert Wexler, with a practiced, reassuring voice, appeared in a hastily filmed video. He announced that the bank was deeply disturbed by the lack of compassion shown in the courtroom. He stated that they were immediately withdrawing their foreclosure petition and forgiving the entirety of Agnes Reed's reverse mortgage. Her home was hers, free and clear, forever. "We have failed to live up to our own standards of community care," Wexler said, looking directly into the camera. "We are donating $5 million to a fund for elderly housing assistance to ensure this never happens again." Mr. Graves, the smirking lawyer, was summarily fired, his law firm issuing a statement that his conduct did not reflect their values. The power of the viral wave had spoken. For Judge Terrence Albright, however, the nightmare was just beginning. Karma, when it arrived, was not a gentle course correction. It was a public flogging. The video of him evicting Agnes was just the beginning. Digital sleuths and investigative journalists began digging into his past. Every ruling he had ever made was suddenly under a microscope. A pattern emerged. He had a history of disproportionately harsh sentences for the poor and lenient ones for the wealthy and connected. The story of a single father. He had jailed for 6 months for stealing diapers, and formula went viral. The story of a politically connected real estate developer who had dozens of building code violations mysteriously waived by Albright's court resurfaced. His country club, a bastion of old money and carefully curated reputations, quietly suspended his membership, citing a sudden need to uphold community standards. A prestigious law school, where he was a guest lecturer, cancelled his upcoming seminar on judicial ethics. His wife, a socialite who moved in circles where public image was everything, stopped leaving the house. His children, both in expensive private universities, were ostracized by their peers. The life he had so meticulously constructed, a life of unassailable authority and respect, crumbled like sun-baked clay. He became a pariah, A meme, a late-night talk show punchline. The man who saw himself as a pillar of order was now the poster child for systemic arrogance. Agnes, on the other hand, became a folk hero. Asterisk gifts and letters poured in from all over the world. A bakery in France sent a box of exquisite pastries. A sheep farmer in New Zealand sent a hand-knitted wool blanket. A third-grade class in Ohio sent a bundle of drawings of her house with rainbows over it. She was no longer just Agnes Reed, the forgotten widow. She was a symbol of resilience, of quiet dignity in the face of institutional cruelty. People didn't just feel sorry for her. They respected her. She handled the sudden fame with the same unassuming grace with which she had handled everything else in her life. She gave one single interview to Sarah, who read a statement Agnes had written by hand on a piece of stationery. "I want to thank everyone for their kindness." It read, "I never asked for any of this. I am grateful to have my home. I only wish that we could all be a little kinder to one another. That is all." She asked for the donations to be sent to charities for the homeless and the elderly. She politely declined offers for talk show appearances and a book deal. The world wanted to make her a celebrity, but Agnes Reed just wanted to be left alone, to tend her garden and live out her days in the house Thomas built. And then, a new player entered the game. It started with a simple, unmarked envelope that arrived by courier. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, expensive-looking paper. It was the deed to her house, officially stamped and recorded by the county. The debt to Sterling Bank had been expunged. But there was a second document. It was a cashier's check, made out to her, for $1 million. There was no letter, no explanation. Just a small, typed note at the bottom. "For your peace and security, you've earned it." Agnes and Sarah were baffled. The Hollywood actor had made a public offer, but this was different. This was silent, anonymous, and immense. A week later, the other shoe dropped, and it shook the entire city. The historical Tillinghast County Courthouse, the very building where Agnes had been humiliated, was put up for sale. The county, facing a budget crisis, had been planning to sell the aging, expensive building for years, with plans to move the courts to a new, modern facility on the outskirts of town. The sale was accelerated, and it was announced that a sealed bid auction would take place. The day the auction closed, a rumor spread through the city that a major commercial developer had won, with plans to gut the historic building and turn it into luxury condos. There was a public outcry, but it was too late. The deal was done. The twist came when the new owner was officially recorded. It wasn't a developer. The courthouse had been purchased for an astronomical sum, far above market value, by a newly formed entity, the Agnes Reed Foundation for Humane Justice. No one knew who was behind it. The foundation was a ghost, its funding untraceable, its board of directors anonymous. All anyone knew was that the symbol of Judge Albright's power, the very seat of his authority, now bore the name of the woman he had tried to destroy. It was a move of such breathtaking audacious karma that it left the entire city speechless. Who had this kind of money? And what was their connection to Agnes Reed? The answer came in the form of a man who appeared on Agnes's doorstep 2 days later. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a simple, dark suit. But his eyes held a warmth that was at odds with his billionaire uniform. He looked to be in his late 40s, with a face that was both handsome and etched with the memory of some long-ago struggle. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice quiet and respectful. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I believe you saved my life a long time ago. I've come to finally thank you." Agnes stared at him, confused. The name meant nothing to her. "I'm sorry," she said, her hand on the doorframe. "I think you have the wrong house." "No, ma'am," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "I have the right house. I used to be called Marcus Peters. I was 12 years old. And I was standing right where you are now, in courtroom for B, in front of Judge Albright." And, suddenly, a memory, dusty and distant, flickered in the back of Agnes's mind. A skinny, terrified boy with eyes too big for his face, standing alone before the judge's bench. A foster kid who had run away from an abusive home one too many times. "I remember," she whispered, her eyes widening. "He was going to send you to the Northgate facility." Northgate, the name, was a stain on the county's history. A place of horrors, later shut down after a massive abuse scandal. A place from which few children emerged whole. "He was," Marcus Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. "The paperwork was on his desk. The transport van was waiting. And you were the court clerk. You took my file." Agnes remembered the moment with sudden, startling clarity. She had seen the look in the boy's eyes. It was the look of a trapped animal, a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She had seen the smug certainty on Judge Albright's face. And in a moment of quiet, unthinking rebellion, she had done something she had never done before or since. I misplaced it, Agnes confessed, the words feeling strange on her tongue after 40 years. I put your file at the bottom of a stack of archived property disputes. It took 2 days for them to find it. 2 days, Marcus repeated, his voice full of wonder. 2 days. That's all it took. In that 40-acre window, my social worker found a different placement, an elderly couple on a farm, an emergency placement. They couldn't have kids of their own. They ended up adopting me a year later. They gave me a life, Ms. Reed. They gave me love, an education. They gave me everything. He took a step closer, his eyes shining with unshed tears. You didn't just misplace a file. You saved a soul. I built a software company. I got lucky. But not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about that skinny kid standing in that courtroom. And the clerk with the kind eyes who gave him a chance. He gestured back toward the street, toward the world beyond her quiet porch. When I saw that video of what he did to you, in that same courtroom, I knew it was time to pay a debt. Paying your mortgage was the easy part. Buying that building, that was justice. Agnes was speechless. Her mind reeled, trying to connect the terrified boy from her memory with this powerful, successful man, standing before her. An act of impulsive, almost unconscious kindness, a small act of bureaucratic defiance 40 years ago, had echoed through time and come back to her in this incredible world-altering way. Judge Albright hadn't remembered the boy at all. To him, Marcus Peters had been just another piece of administrative debris to be cleared away. A file, a docket number. But Agnes had seen a child, and that had made all the difference. The air in Agnes's living room was thick with the weight of Marcus Thorne's proposal. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. The grandfather clock ticking off the seconds of a choice that felt impossibly heavy. He's ruined, you know, Marcus said, his voice a low, steady hum. Sat in the armchair opposite her, a man of immense power, making himself small to fit into her world. His career is over. His reputation is shattered. He'll likely be removed from the bench. In many ways, he's already in a prison of his own making. He leaned forward, his expression intense. But for me, it's not enough. A man like that, a man who holds power and uses it to crush the vulnerable, not just once, but as a habit, as a philosophy. He shouldn't just fade away. He should be a lesson, a warning. This was the reason for his visit, the true purpose behind the grand gestures. He wanted more than just poetic justice. He wanted a reckoning. I have the resources, Agnes, he said, the name now familiar, almost familial. I have a team of the best lawyers and investigators money can buy. We can launch a civil suit. We can petition for a grand jury investigation into his entire judicial history. We can systematically, legally, and publicly dismantle what's left of his life. We can ensure that the name Terence Albright is forever synonymous with corruption and cruelty. We can make him the textbook example of how not to be a human being. He paused, letting the vision hang in the air. It was a tempting image, a world where men like Albright faced a final, definitive judgment. It felt right. It felt just. But, Marcus continued, his voice softening, to do it right, to make it stick, I need you. I need the victim, the face of the movement. It would mean interviews. It would mean testifying. It would mean your picture, your story, dragged through the mud and the headlines all over again. You would have to relive that humiliation, publicly. You would have to trade this peace you fought so hard for, and become a warrior. I would protect you. I would fund everything. You wouldn't have to lift a finger except to tell your truth, but your quiet life would be over. He laid the choice before her, stark and binary. So that's my offer, he said. Option A, you tell me to leave. I disappear. The foundation will continue its work anonymously, and you can live out your days here, in this house, in perfect peace. No one will ever bother you again. Or, option B, you say the word, and we burn him to the ground, together. Agnes looked around the room, at the fading light on the floral wallpaper, at the stoic face of her Thomas in his frame. She thought of the coldness in Judge Albright's eyes, the casual cruelty of his words. He had tried to render her invisible, to turn her into a non-person. The thought of him facing a true, final, and absolute consequence was a siren song. It was a dark, satisfying, and deeply tempting thought. to be the instrument of his final destruction. It was a power she had never imagined, and part of her, a part she hadn't known existed, craved it. What would she do? The question hung in the air, a moral crossroads. Was it enough that he had fallen? Or did he need to be pushed off the cliff? Was personal peace more valuable than public justice? Is it wrong to desire righteous revenge, even if it costs you your own tranquility? She looked at Marcus, this man-shaped echo of a boy she had saved, and saw the same fire in his eyes that she'd seen in the eyes of the young blogger in the courtroom. It was the fire of indignation, the engine of the viral wave, the fuel of justice, and he was offering her the torch. Her heart pounded in her chest, a slow, heavy rhythm. For 70 years, she had chosen the path of quiet dignity, of turning the other cheek, of absorbing life's blows and carrying on. But maybe, just this once, it was time to hit back. The thought was terrifying, and it was thrilling. "I need to think," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to pray on it." Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course," he said, standing up. "Take all the time you need. You know how to reach me." He left as quietly as he had come, leaving Agnes alone in the twilight, wrestling with a choice she never thought she'd have to make, to be a quiet survivor or a righteous destroyer. The days that followed were a torment. Agnes found she could no longer find peace in the familiar corners of her home. The house was hers, secure and safe, but her mind was a battlefield. She would sit in her armchair and imagine the trial. Herself on the stand, her voice clear and strong, detailing the cold, systematic stripping of her dignity. She pictured Judge Albright at the defendant's table, his composure finally cracking, his face pale with the realization that his power was gone. The image was deeply, satisfyingly sweet. It was the taste of vengeance, and it was addictive. But then, she would imagine the other side, the flashbulbs of the cameras, blinding her, her face on the front page of tabloids. Strangers, dissecting her life, her finances, her family, the quiet sanctuary of her home, the one she had just won back, becoming a fortress against a world that wanted to consume her story. She pictured the stress, the exhaustion, the hollowing out feeling of being a public symbol instead of a private person. And the appeal of peace, of simply being left alone, was overwhelming. She was caught in a perfect, agonizing equilibrium. Two futures, both justified, both with a terrible cost. One morning, she was tending to a small garden, the frost finally receding from the soil, when a car pulled up. It wasn't a news van, or a sleek black car. It was a modest sedan, and from it emerged a woman in a simple dress, her face etched with a familiar anxiety. It took Agnes a moment to place her. It was Mrs. Albright, the judge's wife. Agnes's heart froze. She stood up, her hand on her trowel, her knuckles white. "Mrs. Reed," the woman began, her voice brittle. She stopped at the edge of the lawn, not daring to step onto the property. I know I have no right to be here. I know you must hate us." Agnes said nothing. She simply waited. "My husband, Terence. He is a proud man," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "A hard man. I am not here to defend what he did. It was wrong. It was cruel. I told him so." Tears welled in her eyes. "He is broken. Everything he built, his name, his pride, it's all gone. He just sits in his study all day, staring at the walls." She took a shaky breath. "I read in the paper that there might be more legal action. A civil suit. I am begging you, Mrs. Reed. Please, let it be over. He has been punished. Our family has been punished. We have lost everything. Please, don't take what little we have left. Don't take his freedom. He's an old man. Whatever else he is still my husband." She stood there, a wife pleading for her husband, stripped of all her social status, just a woman begging for mercy. And Agnes saw in her face not the wife of a villain, but a reflection of her own pain, a woman terrified of losing her home, her partner, her life as she knew it. This was the moral dilemma made real. It was no longer an abstract choice between justice and peace. It was a choice between the abstract principle of a public reckoning and the concrete reality of this woman's suffering. Could she find it in her heart to extend the mercy that had been denied to her? Or was this just another tactic, another attempt by the powerful to evade the full measure of their consequences? To forgive him felt like a betrayal of every other person he had ever harmed. To pursue him felt like a cruelty to this woman, who stood before her, utterly defeated. In that moment, looking at the tear-streaked face of another man's wife, Agnes Reed finally found her answer. The press conference was held on the steps of the courthouse. Her courthouse. The building was a hive of activity. Scaffolding already clung to its stone facade. Workers in hard hats moved in and out, and a large, temporary sign hung over the main entrance. The Agnes Reed Foundation for Humane Justice. Opening soon. Marcus Thorne stood beside her, a silent, supportive presence. Sarah was on her other side, holding a microphone. The world's media was assembled on the lawn, a sea of cameras and expectant faces. Judge Albright was not there. He had officially resigned from the bench that morning. Agnes, dressed in her best navy blue coat, stepped up to the podium. She did not look frail. She looked formidable. A few weeks ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers. I stood in this building, a broken woman. You all saw the video. You all know the story. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Many people have shown me kindness. A stranger paid my mortgage and saved my home. For that, I am eternally grateful. And many people have asked for justice. They want to see the man who wronged me punished further. They believe he should be made an example of. She looked at Marcus, a quick, meaningful glance. I was tempted by that path. The anger I felt was real. The desire for him to feel the same pain he caused me was strong. A murmur went through the crowd. This was the moment. The announcement of the lawsuit. The final blow. But I will not be pursuing any further legal action against Mr. Albright, she declared. A collective gasp. A flurry of confused whispers. My husband, Thomas, she continued, her voice ringing with authority, taught me something after he came back from the war. He said you don't win a war by becoming like your enemy. You don't fix cruelty with more cruelty. You fix it by building something better in its place. She turned and gestured to the building behind her. This courthouse was a place of fear for me, a place of humiliation. But from now on, it will be a place of hope. The Agnes Reed Foundation, funded by the generosity of a man this building once failed, will provide free legal services to the elderly, the poor, and the vulnerable. We will have a team of lawyers, social workers, and advocates. We will ensure that no one in this county ever has to face a judge like Mr. Albright, alone and afraid. This was her third option. Not peace, not revenge, but transformation. That is my justice, she said, her voice rising with passion. Not to destroy one man, but to build a system that protects thousands. Mr. Albright's punishment will be to live out his days knowing that his greatest act of cruelty became the seed of his exact opposite. This building, the monument to his power, is now a monument to his failure. His legacy is not one of order, but one of kindness built from its ashes. And my name is on the door. It was the most devastating, elegant, and final checkmate imaginable. She had not just won the game. She had changed the entire board. The visual was breathtaking. The small 90-year-old woman, standing in front of the grand stone courthouse, that now bore her name, a symbol not of her suffering, but of her victory. She hadn't needed to burn him to the ground. She had simply built a garden on his grave. She finished her speech, turned away from the microphone, and let Marcus Thorne lead her back inside the building, leaving the stunned media to process what they had just witnessed. Cruelty always collects its debt. But sometimes, the payment isn't made in the currency of revenge, but in the currency of redemption. Where are you reading this from? Drop your city, your state, your country. See how far this story travels. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next justice twist.